The press event was going perfectly. 300 people in the room, 17 journalists, 8 investors who had flown in from 4 different cities, a stage designed by someone who understood that the presentation of a product is itself a product, clean lines, dramatic lighting, the engine on a raised platform at center stage like a sculpture in a museum, which was exactly what Diana Voss intended, because this engine was not just a machine, it was a statement. 6 years of work, $340 million. The most efficient compact turbine engine ever built for commercial application, 41% more fuel efficient than the nearest competitor, manufacturable at a cost that would restructure the industry. The kind of technological achievement that arrives once in a generation and realigns everything that comes after it. Diana had been speaking for 11 minutes. She was good at this, precise and passionate in the specific combination that makes people believe not just in the product, but in the person presenting it. She had built Voss Industries from a 2-person operation in a rented lab in San Jose to a company with 412 employees and a valuation that had crossed $1.2 billion last quarter. She had earned the room. She knew it. The room knew it. She was mid-sentence when the door at the back opened. Not the main entrance, the side door, the one marked staff only that the event coordinators had been using for catering traffic. It opened, and a man walked in, and nobody stopped him, because the way he walked in made the people nearest the door assume he was supposed to be there. He wasn't. He was 43 years old. Work jacket. Jeans. The kind of hands that belong to someone who builds things, calloused, scarred in the specific places that tools scar hands. He was not tall, and he was not imposing, and he carried nothing except his phone, and the expression of a man who had driven 4 hours and was not leaving until something happened. He walked to the front of the room. Not quickly, not frantically, with the steady, measured pace of someone who has made a decision and is now simply executing it. The way you walk toward something when you are certain, and the certainty has its own momentum. Diana stopped speaking. The room turned. The man looked at the engine on the platform. He looked at it the way you look at something you made with your own hands, not with wonder, not with admiration, but with the specific, intimate recognition of someone reading their own handwriting. He looked at Diana. He said 6 words, "I need to see the manifold," and the most successful product launch in Voss Industries history stopped. Diana Voss had been an engineer before she was a CEO. This was not unusual in the technology industry, but it was unusual in the specific way she had been an engineer, not as a credential, not as a stepping stone, but as a vocation. She had grown up in Detroit, the daughter of an automotive assembly line supervisor, in a house where the dinner table conversation was about tolerances and yields, and the specific mathematics of making things work at scale. She had gone to Michigan State on a full scholarship, gotten her mechanical engineering degree in 3 years instead of 4, and gone directly into the automotive industry where she had spent 7 years learning, in the most practical possible environment, what it meant to build something that had to work every time under every condition for hundreds of thousands of people. She had left the automotive industry not because she had failed at it, but because she had identified something it was missing. Efficiency, not operational efficiency. The automotive industry was extremely good at that. Thermodynamic efficiency, the ratio of energy input to useful work output in internal combustion systems. She had become, in her 7 years on assembly lines and in engineering departments, convinced that the fundamental architecture of the compact turbine engine, an architecture that had been essentially unchanged since the 1950s, had an unexplored solution space that the industry had stopped looking at, because the incremental improvements available within the existing paradigm were sufficient to satisfy market requirements. Sufficient was not a word Diana Voss was comfortable with. She had left her job in 2015. She had founded Voss Industries with her own savings and a small seed round from 2 investors who knew her from the automotive world. and who believed in her the way people believe in someone who has always been the smartest person in every room they've shared with her. She had hired 6 engineers. She had given them one assignment: find the unexplored solution space in compact turbine efficiency, not incrementally. Fundamentally, start from the architecture and question everything that the architecture assumed. 3 years of work, 14 failed prototypes, 1 engineer who quit, and 2 who almost did. And then, in 2020, her lead engineer Marcus had come to her office on a Tuesday morning and put a technical report on her desk and said, with the understatement of someone who has just witnessed something they don't fully have language for yet, "I think you need to look at this." The report was an analysis of a prototype engine assembly that Marcus had acquired through a parts broker and industrial auction house that specialized in prototype and experimental equipment. The assembly had come from an estate sale. The provenance was thin. The broker had described it as a custom fabricated experimental turbine prototype. Origin unknown. Believed to be a private research project, but the engineering was not thin at all. Marcus had taken it apart. What he found inside was a solution. Not a partial solution. Not a direction. A solution, a specific, implemented, functional answer to the thermodynamic problem that Voss Industries had been working on for 3 years, executed in a way that none of Marcus's team had considered, using an approach that was not in any literature they had surveyed, that appeared to have been arrived at independently by someone working outside any institutional framework. Marcus had spent 2 weeks verifying it. Then he had come to Diana's office. Diana had looked at the report. She had looked at the engine. She had said, "Who built this?" Marcus had said, "We don't know. The broker doesn't know. It came from an estate sale, the estate of a man who died without close family. His workshop contents were liquidated." Diana had looked at the engine for a long time. Then she had said, "Can we improve on it?" Marcus had said yes. She had said, "Then let's improve on it." It had not been a decision she made in bad faith. She had asked about the origin. The origin was unknown. The property had been legally acquired through a legitimate commercial transaction. Her lawyers had reviewed the chain of title. Her IP counsel had advised that patents on the improvements on what Voss Industries' team had developed from the foundational prototype were defensible. She had believed this. She had believed all of it. What she had not done, what none of them had done, was ask the question underneath the question. Not who owned it legally. Who made it? And why? Caleb Marsh had become an engineer the hard way. Not the hard way of difficult coursework or competitive programs, though there had been that too. The hard way of a man who had always understood machines intuitively, in his hands and in his mind simultaneously, in the way that belongs to people for whom the physical and the theoretical are not separate languages but dialects of the same one. He had grown up in Fresno, California, the son of a mechanic, and had rebuilt his first engine at 14, not because anyone taught him, but because a broken engine was available, and the solution was interesting, and those 2 conditions had always been sufficient for Caleb Marsh. He had gotten his engineering degree at Cal State Fresno. He had worked for 8 years at an aerospace components firm in the Central Valley. Good work, interesting problems. The kind of environment where his specific combination of theoretical understanding and practical instinct was valued in the way it is valued when the people around you have either one or the other, but rarely both. He had met Sarah there. Sarah was a project manager, organized, funny, with the specific talent of being the person in the room who understood what everyone meant even when they weren't saying it clearly, which in an engineering environment is a gift beyond calculation. They had been married at 30. Iris had arrived at 32 unplanned, and immediately the most important thing in either of their lives, the kind of arrival that recalibrates everything. The workshop had been Caleb's from the beginning, a rented space in an industrial park on the south side of Fresno, 2,000 square feet, a loading door, workbenches along 2 walls, a corner where he had put a small desk and a lamp and a stool that Iris had claimed as her own by the time she was 5. He had used it, in the early years, for side projects, the kind of engineering work that a man with a specific mind does in the hours that belong to him. Not because it pays, but because not doing it is a kind of low-grade suffering that he had learned, over time, to stop trying to explain to people who didn't feel the same way. In 2017, the side project became the project. He had been reading compulsively, systematically, the way he read everything he cared about the technical literature on compact turbine efficiency. And he had found, in the gap between what the literature said was possible and what the literature said had been attempted, the same thing that Diana Voss had found: an unexplored solution space. But he had also found something else. A direction, a specific, counterintuitive, deeply unorthodox direction that he could not find anywhere in the literature because it required combining approaches from two fields that had not, to his knowledge, been combined in this context: a thermal management principle from cryogenic engineering and a pressure regulation method from hydraulic systems design. Neither principle was new. The combination was. He had quit his job at 36. Sarah had been alarmed. They had a 4-year-old. They had a mortgage. He had explained it to her the way he explained things he believed, completely not with salesmanship, but with the simple, direct force of genuine conviction. She had listened. She had asked questions. She had been quiet for a long time. Then she had said, "How long do you need?" He had said, 3 years, maybe 2. She had said, "Okay, 3 years." That had been 2017. 2018 was the year of 14 failed prototype iterations and the discovery of the thermal management approach that changed everything. 2019 was the year the engine came together. Not all at once, not dramatically. The way solutions arrive after long preparation incrementally. Then suddenly, the last pieces falling into place over 3 weeks in the spring, with the specific momentum of something that has been waiting for the right conditions. He had worked at night, mostly. Iris was in school during the day, 1st grade. Then 2nd and the mornings were for her, for breakfast, and the school run, and the hour after pickup when she did her homework at the little desk in the corner of the workshop and he worked nearby. The deep work happened after she was asleep. Midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. sometimes. She used to wake up and find him there. Not every night, but enough nights that it became a thing between them. She would pad down the hallway in her pajamas and appear in the workshop doorway, and he would hear her and turn around, and she would already be climbing up onto the stool, fully awake, ready to observe. She called the engine the humming thing from the first time she heard it run. The first successful test run had been at 11:30 on a March evening in 2019. Caleb had been alone. He had started it and listened to it and sat down on the floor of the workshop because his legs had decided that sitting was now the appropriate response to what he was hearing. He had stayed there for 20 minutes listening to the engine run with the tears of a man who has spent 2 years building towards something and has arrived. He had called Sarah. She had come to the workshop at midnight in her coat over her pajamas. She had listened. She had put her hand on his face. She had said, "I knew it." 3 weeks later, Iris had been there for a test run and had put her hand on the housing and felt the vibration and said, with the authority of a 7-year-old making a declaration, "It's humming. It's the humming thing." It had been called that ever since. The photograph was taken at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in September of 2019. Iris had woken up a nightmare. She thought there was something under her bed. She had come to the workshop because the workshop was where her father was, and her father was where Safe was. He had held her until the nightmare dissolved, and then she had climbed onto the stool and looked at the engine and said she wanted to stay for a while. He had let her stay. She had fallen half asleep on the stool, her head resting on her arms on the workbench, one hand extended toward the engine, housing the way children extend their hands toward things they find comforting. Caleb had looked at her. At his 7-year-old daughter, half asleep on a workshop stool at 2 a.m, her hand resting near an engine that he had spent 2 years building, that hummed in the specific key that she had named. He had taken out his phone. He had taken a picture, not for documentation, not for legal protection, not for any reason that would matter in a deposition room 7 years later. Because she was small, and the engine was large, and she looked like she belonged there, which she did, because she had been there for so much of it, and he wanted to remember the moment. He had put the phone back in his pocket. He had carried her to bed. He had gone back to the workshop and worked until 4 a.m. He did not know, in September of 2019, that 6 months later, Sarah would leave, that the marriage, which had seemed solid enough to survive anything, had been surviving things it shouldn't have had to survive the years of financial pressure. The side project consuming everything. The man who was physically present and mentally somewhere else, in the gap between what had been built and what still needed to be built, and that Sarah had reached the end of her capacity for it, with a quietness that he had missed until it was finished. He did not know that the clients he was depending on for workshop income would dry up in the first months of 2020 when the world closed. That the mortgage on the workshop he had been buying it, slowly, with the work income, would fall behind. That by August of 2020, with Iris in 3rd grade and the engine sitting finished and patented and ready, and no investor willing to meet in person, and no income coming in, he would make the worst decision of his life. He had put the engine in storage, a commercial storage facility on the east side of Fresno. And when the storage payments had fallen behind too, when everything had fallen behind, when the entire structure of the life he had built had come undone simultaneously in the way that financial collapse is not one thing, but everything at once, the storage facility had auctioned the contents of his unit. He had not known for 3 months. By the time he found out, the engine was gone. He had spent 2 years trying to find it. He had found it on a Tuesday morning in March of 2026, in a press release photo on the website of a company called Voss Industries. He had recognized the shape before he recognized anything else. The specific, unmistakable shape that Iris used to trace with her finger. He had sat at his kitchen table for a long time. Then he had found the address of the press event. Then he had gotten in his truck. The room was completely still. 300 people, 17 journalists, 8 investors, a stage crew of 4, all of them watching a man in a work jacket who had just walked to the front of the room and said 6 words to the CEO of a billion-dollar company. Diana Voss had been in enough high-pressure situations to know that the quality of her response in the next 30 seconds would determine the quality of everything that followed. She looked at the man. She said, with complete composure, "I'm sorry, sir, this is a private event." "I know," Caleb said. "I need to see the manifold." "Sir, I'm going to need to ask you to the left exhaust manifold," Caleb said. "There's an irregular weld on the lower coupling, 3 centimeters, slightly convex, with a specific crosshatch pattern in the bead. I made it at 2 in the morning with a filler rod that was the wrong grade because I ran out of the right one." He looked at the engine. "If that weld is there, this is my engine." The silence had a different quality now. Not the silence of disruption, the silence of a room that has just processed something and doesn't know what to do with it. Diana looked at her security director, a man named Holt, who was already moving toward Caleb. "Wait," said a voice. It was Marcus, her chief engineer. He was standing to the left of the stage, where the technical team had been positioned for the Q&A segment. He was looking at Caleb with an expression that Diana had never seen on him before, the expression of a man whose mind is moving very fast in a direction he didn't expect. "Marcus," Diana said, a warning in his name. "The manifold," Marcus said. He looked at Diana. He said it again, differently, "the manifold." Diana looked at him. She looked at Caleb. She looked at the engine on the platform. She made a decision. "Clear the room," she said. "Everyone, we'll reschedule the remainder of the presentation. I apologize for the interruption. Our team will be in touch with all media and investor contacts within the hour." The room took 90 seconds to process this and begin moving. In those 90 seconds, nobody spoke. In those 90 seconds, Diana Voss and Caleb Marsh stood 12 feet apart and looked at each other with the specific attention of two people who understand that they are at the beginning of something that neither of them fully has language for yet. When the room was clear, staff, security, everyone except Marcus and Diana's legal counsel, a woman named Patricia, who had appeared from somewhere and whose expression communicated that she understood exactly what was happening and that she needed to be present for it, Diana nodded at Holt. Holt brought a stepladder. Caleb climbed it. He found the manifold in 11 seconds. He looked at the lower coupling for a long time. Then he climbed down. He looked at Diana. He said, "It's there." Marcus had seen it too. He had climbed the ladder after Caleb and looked at the weld and climbed back down and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that the weld hadn't already said. He had known about the weld. He had documented it when his team was reverse engineering the original prototype. He had noted it in his technical log as an anomalous fabrication artifact, consistent with field repair technique, non-structural. He had assigned it no further significance. It had not occurred to him, in 2 years of working with the engine, that an anomalous fabrication artifact was a signature, that the irregular weld was not a flaw, it was a fingerprint. Patricia, the legal counsel, had her phone out. She was not calling anyone. She was looking at something on the screen. Her face had the quality of someone reading information they would prefer not to be reading. "Patricia," Diana said. Patricia looked up. "The original acquisition documentation," she said. "The parts broker who sold us the prototype assembly. I'm looking at the chain of title. And? The broker acquired it from a commercial storage auction." A pause. "Sunrise Storage Solutions, Fresno, California." Another pause. "August 2020. The room was very quiet. Diana looked at Caleb. Caleb said nothing. He did not need to say anything. The manifold had said it. Fresno had said it. 2020 had said it. "What's your name?" Diana said. "Caleb Marsh." She said, "Mr. Marsh, I think we need to sit down." They sat in the conference room adjacent to the event space. Diana, Caleb, Marcus, Patricia, and a second attorney who had been summoned by text during the room, clearing Diana's senior IP counsel, a man named Robert, who had filed the patents on the Voss turbine improvements, and who arrived looking like a man who had received a phone call he had been dreading for 2 years, without knowing he was dreading it. Caleb put his phone on the table. He opened the camera roll. He went to September 2019. He turned the phone to face the room. The photograph. 2:17 a.m. His workshop. The engine on the workbench not assembled to final spec, mid-build, but unmistakably the same engine. The same architecture. The same manifold with the irregular weld visible in the workshop lighting. And in the background, taped to the wall above the workbench, a child's drawing in crayon. A yellow house with a large sun and a figure with oversized hands that was clearly meant to be Caleb, and written across the top in the large, careful letters of a 7-year-old. My dad's workshop, and in the corner of the photograph, the timestamp, 09/16, 2019, 02/17, and Robert looked at the photograph. He looked at Diana. He said, with the specific controlled tone of a lawyer who is performing composure while his internal landscape is undergoing significant change, "Our earliest patent application was filed November 2021. 14 months, Patricia said. 14 months, Robert confirmed. Marcus was looking at the photograph with the expression of a man watching 2 years of his professional life recontextualize in real time. He had worked on this engine every day for 2 years. He had written the technical documentation, overseen the improvements, presented the findings. He had believed genuinely, completely, that Voss Industries had built on an unknown prototype and improved it, and owned the improvements legitimately. He had not asked where the prototype came from. None of them had asked where the prototype came from. "Mr. Marsh," Robert said carefully, "do you have additional documentation of the original build? Design files, fabrication logs, prior patent filings, provisional patent application," Caleb said. "Filed March 2019. It lapsed in 2020 when I couldn't make the maintenance payment." He paused. "I also have 3 years of engineering notebooks, build logs, design iterations, test data. They're in my truck." The sentence landed in the conference room and stayed there. "They're in my truck." 3 years of engineering documentation. In his truck, in the parking structure of the Voss Industries event facility in San Jose, California. The foundational evidence of a patent case that would restructure a billion-dollar company's intellectual property portfolio in a truck. Because Caleb Marsh had driven 4 hours on a Tuesday morning when he saw a photograph online of an engine that he recognized the way you recognize your own face. Diana stood up. She walked to the window. The view was the San Jose skyline, the city her company had helped define. The city where she had built something she believed in. The city where $340 million in 6 years of work had produced what she had been presenting 40 minutes ago as the achievement of her career. She stood at the window. She was a woman who had always known exactly what she believed and exactly what she was doing. She did not, at this moment, know either of those things. She turned around. "Marcus," she said. "Did you know?" Marcus looked at her. "No." "Did anyone on the technical team know?" "No, Diana. The provenance documentation the broker provided was—" "I'm not asking about the documentation," Diana said. "I'm asking whether anyone on the technical team had reason to believe that the prototype had been built by a living person who had not been compensated or credited." A silence. "No," Marcus said. Diana nodded. She looked at Caleb. Caleb was watching her with the same steady, controlled expression he had worn since he walked through the side door. The fury that had driven him here was still present. She could see it, beneath the surface. The way you see the current of a river from the bank, but it was managed. Directed. He was not a man who had come here to destroy. He was a man who had come here for the truth. And the truth was now in the room. And he was waiting to see what the people in the room were going to do with it. "Tell me about the engine," Diana said. "Not the legal part. The engine itself." She paused. "Why did you build it?" Caleb looked at her for a moment. "My daughter used to come sit with me in the workshop at night," he said. "When she couldn't sleep, she'd sit on the stool and watch me work." He looked at the phone, at the photograph still on the screen. "One night she asked me what I was making. I said something that hums, something that moves things. She asked if it would do something great. He looked at the window. I said yes, because I believed it." The conference room was quiet. "And then I lost it," Caleb said. "And I spent 3 years thinking I was wrong." Diana looked at him. She looked at the photograph, at the child's drawing taped to the workshop wall. My dad's workshop. The figure with oversized hands. She sat back down. The lawyers took over for 3 weeks. This is what lawyers do. And they did it thoroughly. Depositions scheduled. Discovery requests filed. Expert witnesses identified. The legal architecture of a case that Robert had described to Diana privately as the most complex IP situation I have encountered in 22 years of practice, beginning to take shape in conference rooms and document repositories, and the specific, airless language of litigation. Caleb had a lawyer. Her name was Andrea Souls, 41 years old, patent litigation specialist, who had been recommended to Caleb by a law school friend, and who had driven to Fresno to meet him, and had spent 4 hours going through the engineering notebooks in his kitchen, and had emerged from those 4 hours with the expression of someone who has just been handed a case that is going to define a portion of their career. She had said, "Tell me everything, from the beginning." He had. She had said, "The photograph is extraordinary. But I need to know, is there anything else? Any other documentation from before the lapse of the provisional patent?" Caleb had thought about it. He had gone to his garage. He had come back with 3 items. The first was the engineering notebooks, 7 of them, spiral-bound, in the specific density of a working engineer's documentation, covering every design iteration from 2017 to 2019. The second was a USB drive containing 5,214 photographs of the build process, taken obsessively across 3 years. The way Caleb photographed everything in the workshop, because he believed in documentation, and because the camera on his phone was always in his hand. The third was a video, 23 minutes long, taken on a phone, slightly shaky. Date stamped March 14th, 2019. It was the first successful test run of the engine. The engine running. The workshop. Caleb's voice off camera, saying nothing for the first 30 seconds because there was nothing to say. And then in the background, the sound of small feet on the hallway floor, and Iris appearing in the workshop doorway in her pajamas, her hair still compressed from sleep, looking at the running engine with her eyes wide, and Caleb's voice saying, softly, "Come listen," and Iris walking to the engine and putting her hand on the housing, and the smile on her face, and her voice 7 years old, certain in the way of children who have not yet learned to doubt their own perceptions, saying, "It's humming, Dad, it's the humming thing." Andrea Souls had watched the video twice. Then she had looked at Caleb. She had said, "They cannot win this case." The deposition was scheduled for a Wednesday. The conference room was in a legal office in San Francisco neutral ground, which both teams had agreed to. 8 lawyers total. A court reporter. An expert witness retained by Voss Industries' team, who was a mechanical engineer with 3 decades of patent litigation experience. An expert witness retained by Andrea, who was a professor of mechanical engineering at Stanford, with a specialization in turbine systems. The Stanford professor had looked at the engineering notebooks for 2 days before the deposition. He had submitted a preliminary report that described Caleb's original design as a foundational innovation in compact turbine thermodynamics, representing a genuine and independent solution to a problem that has eluded institutional research for decades, demonstrating both profound theoretical understanding and exceptional practical engineering skill. Robert, reading this report, had said nothing for a long time. Then he had said to Diana, "We need to talk about settlement." Diana had said, "I know." She had been saying "I know" for 3 weeks. She had been saying it to Robert and to Patricia and to her board of directors 4 emergency calls in 3 weeks, her board's alarm increasing with each one, and to her investors, and to herself. In the specific internal conversation that runs underneath all the external ones, when a person is processing something that is going to require them to change. The deposition was going to run for 2 days. It ran for 4 hours. The photograph was entered as evidence at 9:47 in the morning. The Stanford professor explained, with the patience of someone who has taught complex concepts to non-experts for 30 years, the correlation between the design features documented in Caleb's engineering notebooks and the architecture of the Voss turbine. He explained the timestamp. He explained the provisional patent lapse. He explained the chain of title from Sunrise Storage Solutions in Fresno to the parts broker to Voss Industries. He explained the manifold. He explained the weld. He said the irregular weld on the left exhaust manifold coupling is consistent with a manual repair technique using a lower-grade filler rod. It is present in the photograph taken on September 16, 2019. It is present on the engine currently in the possession of Voss Industries. It is, in the context of this case, a physical signature, the equivalent of a maker's mark that establishes continuity between the engine documented in Mr. Marsh's records and the engine that forms the foundation of Voss Industries' turbine product line. Robert had no questions for the Stanford professor. He had looked at his legal pad. He had looked at Diana, who was seated beside him. Diana had been looking at the photograph throughout the professor's testimony, not at the manifold, at the background, at the child's drawing on the wall, my dad's workshop. At 11:14 in the morning, Diana had passed Robert a note. The note said, "Call them. Today, not through lawyers. Call Caleb Marsh directly." Robert had looked at her. She had looked back. He had called. Caleb was in his truck in the parking structure when his phone rang. Not Andrea's number. Not a San Francisco area code. A number he didn't recognize. He answered. Mr. Marsh. Diana Voss's voice. Not the press event voice, the composed, precise, performance-calibrated voice of a CEO at a podium. Something underneath that. The voice of a person who has set something down and is speaking from beneath it. I asked Robert to get your direct number. I hope that's all right. Caleb said, It's all right. I want to talk to you, Diana said. Not as opposing counsel. I want to talk to you as a person. Talking to another person. A pause. Is that something you're willing to do? Caleb looked out through the windshield of the truck at the concrete wall of the parking structure. He said, I'm listening. I need to ask you something, Diana said. And I want you to know that whatever you answer, it doesn't change the legal situation. I'm not asking to get anything from you. I'm asking because I need to understand something. Ask, Caleb said. The pause lasted 4 seconds. Then Diana said, Why did you build it? The question landed in the truck and sat there. Caleb had been asked a lot of questions in the past 3 weeks. About the engineering notebooks. About the provisional patent. About the storage unit and the lapse date. And the broker chain. Questions with legal stakes and financial stakes and evidentiary stakes. Nobody had asked him this one. He was quiet for a moment. Not because he didn't know the answer. Because the answer was the whole thing, the whole 3 years. The whole marriage and the loss of it, and the workshop at 2 a.m. and Iris on the stool, and the humming thing, and the storage unit, and the photograph, and it was not a small thing to say to the person on the other end of this phone call. But Diana had asked plainly. So he answered plainly. My daughter used to come sit with me in the workshop at night, he said. When she couldn't sleep. She was 7, 8. She'd climb up on the stool and watch me work, and she never complained that it was late, or that the workshop smelled like metal and oil. She just watched. He stopped. One night she asked me what I was building, and I told her something that hums, something that moves things, and she asked if it would do something great. He looked at the concrete wall. I said yes. Because I believed it. A pause. And then, everything fell apart. The marriage, the money, the storage unit. And I spent 3 years thinking I was wrong. I thought I was building something great and I was wrong, and the engine was gone. And that was just, he stopped. That was just what happened. He heard Diana breathe. And then I saw the photograph, he said, in your press release. And I saw the shape, the specific shape that my daughter used to trace with her finger. And I thought he stopped again. He looked at his hands on the steering wheel. I thought, he said quietly, that it did do something great. It just didn't know it was mine. The silence on the phone lasted a long time. When Diana spoke, her voice had a different quality than any he had heard from her. You weren't wrong, she said. 3 words. He closed his eyes. Mr. Marsh, Diana said. Caleb, I want to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you respond. Okay, I did not know where the engine came from, she said. I know that's not a legal argument. I know it doesn't change what happened. I'm telling you because I need you to know that I did not build this company knowing that I had taken something from someone. I asked about the origin. I received an answer that satisfied our legal standard. I did not ask the question underneath the question. A pause. I should have. That is on me. Whatever the legal outcome of this situation is, that is on me. Caleb said nothing. I want to offer you a settlement, Diana said. Not the one Robert designed. Mine. What I believe is right. I'm listening, Caleb said. Full attribution, Diana said. Everything: the patents, the technical documentation, the product materials, the company history, redesigned from the foundation to credit the original architecture. Your name, your design, what you built. A pause. Second, a founding equity stake in Voss Industries. Not a payout, a stake. Because a payout is for closing a chapter, and I don't want to close this chapter. I want to build on it, honestly this time. Another pause. And third, she stopped. Third, Diana said. The engine, the original, the prototype. I'm having it prepared for return shipment to Fresno. It belongs to you. It has always belonged to you. I just didn't know it yet. Caleb sat in his truck for a long time. He thought about 3 years. He thought about the notebooks in 7 spiral-bound volumes. He thought about the video on his phone, 23 minutes. March 14th, 2019. Iris in her pajamas, with her hand on the housing. He thought about what it meant that the engine had gone out into the world and done what he had believed it would do, had hummed its way into a billion-dollar company, had restructured an industry, had proven the thing he had spent 3 years trying to prove without him, without his name on it, without Iris knowing. He thought about what Diana had just said. You weren't wrong. He said, "Can I ask you something?" Yes, when you saw it for the first time, he said. The original engine, when Marcus brought you the report. What did you feel? Diana was quiet. I felt like someone had solved something that I had believed was solvable, she said. And I was moved by it. Not just professionally. I was moved by the fact that someone had found the answer. A pause. I didn't know then that the someone was a person working alone in a workshop in Fresno at 2 in the morning with his daughter sleeping in the next room. I think if I had known that she stopped, I think it would have moved me more. Caleb was quiet. I accept your settlement, he said. On one condition. Name it. The attribution, he said, when you redesign the documentation. The original patent credit. I want it to say designed and built by Caleb Marsh, Fresno, California, 2017 to 2019. A pause. And I want a line underneath that. What line? Caleb looked at his hands. With thanks to Iris, who named it. The engine came back to Fresno on a Friday. A freight company. 3 men. A wooden crate that took all 3 of them to move. They set it in the garage of the small house on Clement Avenue, where Caleb and Iris lived, not the old workshop. That was gone. But the garage, which Caleb had spent 2 weeks clearing and preparing, which now had the same workbenches and the same lamp in the corner, and, on the stool by the bench, a child's drawing taped above it. A newer drawing, the art of an 11-year-old rather than a 7-year-old, more detailed, more precise. The hands on the figure still slightly too large. Dad's workshop. Iris had been at school when the crate arrived. Caleb had opened it alone. He had stood in the garage and looked at the engine for a long time. It was the same. The manifold. The irregular weld. The specific architecture that had lived in his notebooks for 3 years before it lived in his hands. That had hummed for the first time on a March evening while he sat on the workshop floor and cried. That had been named by a 7-year-old in pajamas. That had been lost and lost again and found again across 6 years of a life that had not gone the way he planned. It was the same engine. It was also different. It had been out in the world. It had done what he had believed it would do. It had hummed its way into an industry and restructured it and proved, in the most expensive and consequential way possible, that the solution was real and that the man who had found it had been right. He put his hand on the housing. It was cold, hadn't run in weeks. The freight transit, the preparation for shipping. He didn't start it. Not yet. He waited. Iris came home at 3:22. She had known it was coming. Caleb had told her, age-appropriately, carefully, the version of the story that an 11-year-old could hold. Not all of it. Enough of it. The engine was his. It had gotten lost. It was coming home. She had processed this with the specific equanimity of a child who has learned, from her father, that things can be lost and found, and that the finding is what you hold on to. She walked into the garage. She stopped. She looked at it. She walked to it slowly, the way she had walked to it at 7, at 2 in the morning, drawn by the sound that wasn't there right now, but that she remembered in her hands. She put her palm on the housing. She turned to her father. "Start it," she said. He started it. The engine came up, not instantly, the warm-up sequence, the systems finding each other, and then it found its frequency. The specific, unmistakable, deeply particular frequency that Iris had named when she was 7 in her pajamas, and that she recognized now at 11 in her school clothes, without any gap between the memory and the present moment. The hum. She smiled. Not the surprised smile of someone encountering something unexpected, the settled smile of someone being proven right about something they never doubted. She reached into her jacket pocket. She produced a marker. She looked at her father. He looked at the engine. He looked at her. He nodded. She uncapped the marker. She found a clean surface on the housing, a flat panel on the upper assembly, just below where the attribution plate would eventually be mounted, the plate that would say designed and built by Caleb Marsh, Fresno, California, 2017-2019. She wrote 3 words, in her handwriting, 11 years old, careful and certain. The humming thing. She capped the marker. She looked at what she had written. She said, with the absolute certainty of a child who has been right about this for 4 years, "I knew it. There is a thing that happens to knowledge when it is built alone. It does not announce itself. It does not arrive with investors, or press releases, or the institutional validation of a well-funded research program. It arrives in a workshop at 2 in the morning, in the specific quiet of a man who has sent his daughter to bed and turned back to the problem. Because the problem will not leave him alone. Because the answer is in there somewhere, and he is the kind of person who believes genuinely, completely, without the support of evidence, until the evidence arrives that the answer exists and that he is capable of finding it. Caleb Marsh built an engine that restructured an industry. He built it in a rented workshop in Fresno, with 3 years of evenings, and a 7-year-old who climbed up on a stool and watched and named the thing she heard. He lost it in the way that people lose things, when everything fails at once, not through carelessness, not through failure of will, but through the specific cruelty of circumstances that overwhelm even the most capable people when they arrive simultaneously. He found it in a press release photograph. He walked into a room and said 6 words. He did not do this for money. He did not do this for recognition. He did it because his daughter had believed the engine would do something great. And it had, and she deserved to know that she had been right. Diana Voss built a billion-dollar company. She built it in good faith on a foundation that had a story she didn't know yet. When she learned the story, she had a choice. She chose to rebuild on honest ground. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, the thing about Diana Voss that matters most, not the $1 billion, not the press events, not the 6 years of R&D, but the Tuesday afternoon she passed a note to her lawyer that said call him directly, and meant it. The engine is in a garage in Fresno. It has a name written on it in marker. The attribution plate is being manufactured. 2 names on it. One for the man who built it, one for the girl who knew.